So we're getting into the electronics installation of the XRAY X4, and it's getting close to the finish, but still we're gonna have to spend quite some time installing the electronics. So first of all, we're gonna put the servo on the car, and let's talk about the servo of choice here. We really recommend using a low profile servo for your X4 because it will give you the most weight savings and will give you the best amount of space on the chassis for the rest of the electronics. So a low profile servo is definitely preferred. And I'm gonna use the included reversible servo mount, which I've spoken about in the steering system video. So let's put this together here. I'm gonna use the initial setting for the servo mount, so the rearward position in this case. But as you know, it's indeed reversible. So when you install this servo here, you need to try to make it as centered as possible, because the servo mount has some space in it for using different types of servos to be able to fit all servos. So try to keep it centered in here. Try to make sure that it's not sitting too high or too low, and that it doesn't stick out on the inside part of the servo, because if it sticks out here, it might touch the belt, and that's something you want to avoid. And then we're gonna install the outer servo post here. Make sure that the servo is flat in this spot here. If not, you need to cut away any material there so that you can fit this post onto it. At first, we're gonna put the screw from the top, and then the two screws from the back here. And then again, as I said, it's important to make sure that the servo is centered in this whole assembly here. Okay, now I'm happy with how it looks. It's perfectly straight in this direction, and it's not sticking out on the inside, and it's ready to go onto the car. We need to remove the servo post here to fit the servo. Makes it easier to fit the servo, and then it fixates with two screws. And another screw goes back onto the steering post here. And the servo horn, which I spoke about in the steering system setup video. So you already know all about that. I'm just gonna put it in place here on this car. Okay. This link is a bit short. I'm just gonna make it a bit longer. Steering links look a little short. I'm just gonna adjust them as well. Okay, servo is in place. Electronics installation is something that's become a little trickier since we went to a mid-motor platform with a T4, and it still stays that way for the X4 because the motor is still in the middle and the spur gear as well. So there's certain things you need to consider when you put the electronics in the car. And some of these issues can be hard to overcome, but I'm going to explain how to do this in the most simple way. So we have here the car empty, it just has the servo on it. We have here an electronics combo, which is a motor and a speedo already soldered together and ready to go into the car. So I've already done most of the work here. The most important thing here that you need to check is that you have a receiver wire from the speedo that is long enough to reach from the speedo to the receiver. If this is your first mid-motor car, you need to keep that in mind, because on the older style of cars, the speedo was always next to the receiver, but now it's quite a long way from the receiver, which is in front of the servo, to the speedo, which is at the back of the car. So always make sure that you have receiver wire that is long enough to reach from the speedo to the receiver. If not, you need to replace it or use some kind of extension, even though I don't recommend doing that. Okay, so that's all ready. To put this in the car, first of all, I'm going to show you how the cables are arranged. So you can choose to use different orientations of the speedo, but the orientation I've chosen here is the one where I use the least amount of wire for my application. So the speedo is going to be mounted here behind the motor. The power cables from the speedo to the motor are all very short, and they're kept on the side of the motor to keep the CG low. And then we have the battery cables sticking out from the side of the speedo. So the battery terminals on the battery are going to be towards the back. I'm just going to demonstrate this. The battery is going to sit like this, and these cables can reach the battery in the back. That's the best way of pulling the wires. And then the capacitor goes here behind the speedo, right on the chassis. So when we have this combo all wired up and ready to go in the car. We obviously have to install the electronics with double-sided tape, but we're gonna start with the receiver. So I'm gonna put the receiver in this spot here behind the servo. So for this I'm gonna use hoodie double-sided tape. That works the best for this purpose. I always put the receiver next to the servo here. You can wire up the servo already. Plug that in, and then we can start to put double-sided tape on the speedo and the capacitor. So the trick that I'm using here is I'm pulling the ESC wire underneath the speedo. So I'm just putting two small strips of double-sided tape to give space for the wire in the middle. We can hide the wire under the speedo. And that works out pretty good like that. But before installing this in the car, we're gonna need a pinion on the motor. So I suggest using the hoodie lightweight pinion. It's a really nice and light pinion that works great and lasts long. So this needs to be installed quite far out on the motor shaft because of the position of the spur gear. So almost at the very end of the rotor shaft, you need to install the pinion. Okay. Getting ready to mount all of this here. Okay, put the wire in between the tape strips here. And then the motor, and this wire for the receiver needs to go above the motor. Because there's no space underneath the motor like it was on the T4. So the wire goes above the motor and not underneath. Okay, so now it's important to put this in place so that the power wires are not interfering with the top tick. That's point number one. speedo is in place. The power cables are with good clearance from the top deck. And finally we can put the motor in place. And I'm gonna install the motor. Make sure that you get the gear mesh correctly. And then finally we can install this cable here. It's just long enough. Okay, and what about the motor fan? We have a 30mm fan here from Hoodie, which looks like this. And this comes with a plug already on the fan, so we can easily plug this into the receiver. But how do we fixate it on chassis? You can either use the universal fan mount, which mounts right here on the motor mount, or you can just fixate it with double-sided tape. But I'm gonna demonstrate how you can use this fan mount. It mounts right here in the lower corner hole on the fan. I'm gonna use this long screw here. Like that, we mount the fan mount onto the fan. And then we have to put a screw here just where the spur is. So actually we're gonna have to remove the spur for this particular step. To quickly remove the spur gear, because it's very easy to remove on this car. And we can have access to the little hole where we mount the optional fan mount with a round head screw. Comes out there, right in the spot where we want the fan. Okay, that's a perfect fit. And then we can just plug this into the receiver. And we'll put the spur gear back. So the electronics installation on the X4 takes a bit more time than on older platforms, but if you plan everything right and you make the cables the right length, then it's very rewarding once it's done and very efficient. So it's very important here that we have clearance for the cables to the top deck, both for the motor wires and the power cables, that they cannot interfere with the top deck. The wire needs to be long enough to reach the receiver from the speedo. And if you want to mount a fan, I recommend using either the optional fan mount or double-sided tape. And that's the electronics all in place.